I'm Andrew Sherman. I'm a Texas transplant who has always been in pursuit of art as a career. I've played in bands, pursued an acting career in Hollywood, but I found it behind the lens of a camera here in Dallas, Texas. I was born in New York, I've lived in Chicago, Los Angeles, Austin, but I love Dallas. There's a magical artistic scene in Dallas that mostly goes unnoticed to the outside world. This podcast is focused on what makes it so special and the people who make it thrive artistically. If you don't live here, and even if you do, you might not have heard of them. This is the Dallas Famous Podcast.
So who you gonna be? Who you gonna be when you're all grown up? Who you gonna be? Who you gonna be when you're over us? Yeah.
Jerry Saracini is living his rock and roll dreams for real, and he's getting paid for it. Jerry is the drummer for a slew of tribute bands, including Forgotten Space, considered one of the best Grateful Dead tribute bands in Texas. He also plays in tributes with music of Jerry Garcia, the Beatles, and The Who. Jerry joined forces with Relix magazine's Rock and Roll Playhouse, which introduces kids to the music of classic rock. Jerry also helps me fill in some more gaps to the history of the Dallas music scene. This is a fun one, and this episode starts before it starts for a little peek behind the curtain. So sit back and enjoy my chat with Jerry Saracini. My gear is not quite there yet, but working on it still. So this mic is, I used to sing with this back in LA, like in the 90s. It's the same mic.
Oh, really?
But I've gone through all these other mics, and this just seems for me the best one to use for this. So
awesome.
yeah.
I love when I catch glimpses of you jamming back in the day and all that stuff. It's really cool, man.
I mean, that was all I did back in the day.
Yeah?
I mean, I didn't do any of this photo editing stuff. That all came later for me.
Graduating to it. Sure.
More like I was, sitting around going, I'm not an actor, I'm not a musician anymore, because it's like, so what the hell am I going to do with my life? Right. And So.
It's cool to, I always respect when one passion is replaced by another. I consider that, I hate to use the word lucky, because I don't totally, but I mean, you're fortunate when one talent moves into another talent.
Yeah, I mean,
it serves your
soul. For me, it was actually video editing that then led into the photography. When I bought my first camera, it was to do video, which I didn't ever do. I just ended up doing photography, but
gotcha.
None of this was a plan at all.
That's cool.
But what's funny about that, for me too, like there was a time where if you would have said, well, you're going to do something other than music and you're going to love it more, I would have been like, you're fucking crazy.
Right.
But
I know.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of here we are, I'm sitting, it occurs to me, I don't know if I've heard your last name out loud.
Saracini.
Because I was typing it wrong and I went to correct it and I'm like, I'm going to say it wrong because I don't think I've ever heard it. So
it's a little easier when you see it. It's two A's and two I's.
But I think I just assumed it was like Santorini or like I don't know. It's one of those things.
It's my whole life I've heard. I remember I took about 3 days of Italian in college one time before I switched to another class. But and I found out and he was calling my name and I didn't even know it because Saracini is how you would say it. But I grew up Saracini, so I didn't know he was talking to me at the time. Funny.
That's funny. Well, Jerry, I can pronounce. That's your first name. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Thanks. Let's start with the origin story. So where are you from originally?
I grew up mostly in St. Louis. I spent a little time, but almost before memory, in Chicago, other parts of the Midwest, but mostly in St. Louis from almost all conscious age. And I was there till about 27, other than like going to college and stuff like that. When I was 27, I moved down to Dallas. So yeah, the majority of life was either St. Louis or Dallas.
Why did you move to Dallas?
Actually, it was all decided within 24 hours from decision to the whole thing's, all my life is packed up in a truck and we're driving there. And I had, my brother and my dad had lived down here for years.
Okay.
And I was on tour with a band, this original band, and I was my relationship was going to hell back at home, and it was just, it was this whole thing, and And I came back from tour, and it was just devastating. Like, everything was just devastating, and I just realized I kind of needed some different influence in my life. And my sister and my mom were both in St. Louis at that time. My brother and my dad were down here, and all of a sudden it was just kind of like part of, my brother's encouragement. It was like, man, come down here. And I'd never done anything like that, because it was like, leave everything I thought I'd built, every music connection, it was like everything I'd done to that point was there. So it was kind of a big trip, but I'm really, obviously you look back with some hindsight and you're like, God, I'm so glad I did it.
Yeah, definitely. Dallas, same thing for me when I got here, although I was a lot older. Let's back up a little bit more. As a kid, like, when did music become something to you more than just something going on in the background?
Man, I can actually I can definitely pinpoint the actual experience, and I feel really fortunate for that. I've told this a few times, but it's this kind of thing. My birthday is in January, and in December of 1980, I had just gotten turned on to a friend's drum set. And I remember I sat down and he showed me how to play this beat. And I remember thinking, like, I'm not sure if I even ever really understood the mechanics of, like, how a drum set really functions. You just see the guy up there, whatever. And it was so immediate, like, this is so cool. And so I immediately started asking for drums for, like, Christmas, birthday, when it's so close together that it was like I would always get something bigger. I could ask for a combo thing.
How old were you at this point?
I was 11.
Okay.
And so, and then of course, in the beginning of December, John Lennon was assassinated, and I was not really plugged. I mean, I had records, and I knew, like, Paul McCartney, but I didn't really know the beat. I wasn't, like, completely invested in something like that yet musically. And I remember after that happened, going over, I was over at my grandma's house, and I had an aunt who was kind of more like a cousin age by marriage or whatever. And she'd let me use her stereo, and she had a massive record collection. She had a bunch of, so one day when I was sitting there and the news was on, they're showing all the people in Central Park, and I was like, God, I can't believe, like, a week into this and all these people are still, so I was like, I'm just gonna go down and, like, check this out. So I went down, pulled out every Beatle record she had. She about 8 or 7 or something, and I'm looking at them, I'm like, man, I can't even believe this is, like, I can't even tell who's who from this album to, like, these later out, like, And I was throwing them on, and it was like I would always throw on, like, the song I know, and then I'd jump to the next thing or the next album. And I knew there had been a movie out, Sgt. Pepper, so I was looking at that, and I threw it on, and the words were on the back, and there was just something about the look and the feel, and, like, I was, all, like, I'd be down, you're all alone, you're experiencing. I put it on. It's the first time that I ever listened to an album start to finish. I just couldn't stop. I was sitting there reading the lyrics, and I would think, okay, now I'm gonna change, but it just kept pulling me in. And at the end of that experience, mid-December, I, like, having been turned on to drumming a little bit, and then having this experience, I knew right then, this is what I want to do. And what's crazy is that it's never, like, sometimes I stop and I think I'm still on the course of that moment, and it's sort of crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
Everything really should, like, something about that moment, I knew that I had walked through some kind of door. I mean, I'm sure being 11, about to be 12, had something to do with it, but it was like, I knew I couldn't go back after reading the lyrics of that album, experiencing that whole thing. I mean, ending in a day in the life. Like, I knew I couldn't go back to, like, whatever kids do at 11 or 12, games and I was just like, wow. It was like I felt like I had matured somehow.
The music matured you.
It was weird.
That's cool. That's really cool. Okay, well, so then you're now going through that process of like really like focusing on music, I guess, and playing. And so you're playing in original bands in high school and stuff, or when did that start?
Yeah, I mean, there was some of that. It was certainly getting together with friends and jamming, and I was like taking lessons, private lessons, and I was going through school and meaning like all the programs school would have to offer, jazz, classical, all that stuff. And then, but the real, I kind of think of the real original bands happening in college, because like nothing I did in high school ever made it beyond like somebody's party or something.
Sure, sure.
And yeah, in college, there were some, although I will say this, I had kind of two sets of musical friends that were really influential in high school that were starting original bands and were really cool, and they had a pretty profound impact. But everything, I was also doing a kind of thing, like when I started playing, I kind of consider, even though I had gigged professionally before then, I think of 1990 as the real year that I started. And like that's the first time I actually literally got a calendar to keep my dates together or whatever, Mm-hmm. And it was like, and I was always like trying to do everything across the map, like gigs, original band, like cover. There weren't really tribute bands, but like party bands, cover, but like any jazz gigs, like everything was. I was coming from this mindset, reading every modern where it was just like diversify, play everything you can, all that, and part of me wanted to be a studio musician, part of me wanted to be in a band, part of me wanted to be in the Beatles. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And the one thing I wish I had taken more seriously then is all my heroes, which were kind of, older bands at the time. I wish I would have had the foresight to understand that many of those artists would be tapping musicians of my generation eventually to go back out on the road and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think I just, that seemed like a pipe dream. In fact, a lot of my heroes didn't even tour during, and so you just assume they probably never would again. You did.
Oh yeah, no, I remember.
Couldn't see the sort of writing on the wall that Steely Dan and Paul McCartney, people would go back on the road eventually. It just seemed like, those days are over or something.
Oh yeah.
And so yeah, I don't know if I jumped off course.
Not at all. Not at all. So where did you go to school? College?
I spent my first year down here at UNT, and then I went to Mizzou in Columbia, and then I did some more in St. Louis at a place called Webster, which had a jazz program. And that's about the time when I was at Webster. That's when I was. That's about the same time. Actually, Mizzou is where I first started playing in original bands that went out and played venues and stuff like that. And there were two buddies of mine who weren't even connected yet, but during those times, one of the first serious original bands I was in had my buddy Dino English from, who's the drummer in Dark Star Orchestra now, and the other drummer was. We were going through the jazz program at Webster at the same time. And I think I just told this in another thing, so I feel weird. But yeah, that summer we were playing together. I was always going to Dead shows for a week or so in the summer by that time. It was a pretty steady thing, and I'd come back and tell Dino about it, and he was always like, No, he wasn't, but he was just kind of not into Dead, more alternative. You know how they were those kind of...
Yeah, people were not into the Dead, for sure.
Right, and particularly musicians, and particularly kind of alternative original musicians at that time. And I just would come back, and I had a good tape source, and I'd be playing stuff, and it's funny, there are a lot of my friends who maybe even still never got into it. They would sometimes really respond to hearing and feeling the way an audience was responding on a tape to something, and they just be like, you can't. I mean, it gives you chills just talking about it now and stuff.
Wait, I don't want to interrupt, but back up. How did you get into the Dead?
Oh, that was really initially through my brother and his record collection, and him kind of turning me on. Like the first year of playing drums, it was all Beatles and Stones. Basically, Stones were coming on tour in '81, and
Right.
got to go see them, and so it was all that, and then kind of graduated to the Who, kind of that normal Beatles, Stones, Who order, and I remember there's a day where he came up with a handful of albums, and he would, because the whole family had to endure. My routine was that I had this stereo next to the drum set in my room that I would crank to 10 and play along to. It's like, and so the whole family would have to endure whatever trip I was on, and he came up one time. He's like, "Man, it's time you graduate. Like, it's time you check some other stuff out." And I remember there was like Neil Young and the Grateful Dead, and actually that might have been where the Who came into the picture too. And then it was like Leonard Skinner. There was just he gave me a bunch of stuff, and in there the Grateful Dead was pretty interesting, and I was like, whoa. And I remember he had a book too, the official book of the Deadheads, which was like, at the time there weren't that many books out about the Dead.
Right.
And so I'd flip through that, be reading that, be listening to the two albums that hit me first were Shakedown Street album and Skeletons from the Closet. Later, like Little Blues for Allah, and there was some other stuff that I got turned on to, but I can remember the actual song that was the good loving opener of Shakedown Street with Bobby C. Like that, and that was the thing that just like I just
that's interesting.
want to be Bob Weir, and you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, he went through that whole phase, and so then I saw my first show. It was probably within a couple years. Like I was probably 12 around that time, and I think I saw my first show when I was like 14. My mom would she wasn't a Deadhead or anything, but she would really support my interest and allow me to go to concerts. And one time she kept me from going to see the Stones, and then she told me, "Okay, you can go to," like I said, in '81 when I was. And I was trying to win tickets on the radio. I'd get up every morning and call, and I couldn't. And she just, one day she said she heard me in there trying, and so she surprised me like that December. I came home from school one day, and she was like, get ready or something. We're going to Kansas City to see the Stones tonight or something. And she'd hooked up some cool tickets, and so we were like right next to the stage, on the level of the stage, and it was amazing.
Cool, mom.
Yeah, so she would kind of help out, and so she did that for the Dead too. She took me. It's so funny to think about it. She took me and my girlfriend at the time to Kansas City to see the Dead, and I laugh when I think about, like, I remember that she went to go pick up the tickets while we were at the hotel, and she was driving through the lot, and all the heads were freaking. Imagine my mom driving through the lot. Oh, so funny.
Oh, that is great.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So, and then, the next set of shows was 86 Alpine. And so that was 1, 2, 3. And
my first show was Alpine, but not until 88.
I was there for a couple of those. Like, they were split.
I just went to one, and it was, I remember bits. I remember they closed with Knocking on Heaven's Door. So. Okay.
I think you were on the other end of the two that I saw. Because it was something like, it was like they were playing I remember this clip. They were playing two nights, and someone, either Carlos Santana or
Dylan,
someone, it might have been Dylan. Yeah, it was in between, and then they had two more.
Because I thought he was on stage with them.
Right.
But he wasn't.
Sometimes
there's a couple of firsts.
Like that.
Couple of firsts that show I won't specify.
Yes.
But
the great Alpine.
Yeah, that was a great. I saw a fish there, and I saw that there. So you get to Dallas. How did you find the scene?
You mean like the dead scene, or just the music scene in general?
Whichever was first for you.
Yeah, you know, I had always at that point. I wouldn't play dead music. I was like kind of even sort of. I mean, it was almost like a conscious thing, but I can't tell. There weren't sort of like the bar was not real high for people who played dead music back in the day. It was always
sure
kind of parking lot jams to maybe like a little blues bar with some guys, and I remember Dino had gotten really into it and started playing it, as did Rob. That's how they hooked up in St. Louis eventually to join Dark Star Orchestra. But at the time, there weren't like Dark Star Orchestra kind of level things. Mm-hmm. And I was so dedicated to original music.
Sure.
It was two things. I didn't want to ruin the dead for me. And I kind of had this rule, this like in my mind, it was this thing about, I like those 6 guys playing this music. I don't like anybody playing this music. You know, I like it when those 6 guys, the Grateful Dead, played this music. Mm-hmm. And I would almost sometimes even separate that whole world and experience musically. Like music was divided into here's everything, and then here's the Grateful Dead. And so, and I will say when I moved down here, it was 97. So Jerry had passed, and I actually had to, even after being down here, I had to separate from the music it was too painful. It was,
sure.
I just missed everything. Something would come into my orbit, or I'd go, I had a, 500 tape collection, or like, so I'd go pull something out every once in a while. And I was, I still felt connected to it, but I just couldn't visit. And the thing that pulled me back in was when Phil Lesh and Bob Weir came to Oklahoma City in 2001. And I was like, oh, it's too close. And I got to see what they're about these days. I don't know. Couldn't fathom doing it without Jerry, but to get back to your question, when I moved down here and I was like, I'd done it so abruptly, and I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And I remember it was like the one time in my life where, I was only like 27 years old. I hadn't really lived that long, but it seemed like I had lived a lifetime of music and professional connections. So, and I thought, wow, man, I have to start all over. Because like I said, I had diversified music and gigs so much that I felt like I had left a lifetime of connections and routes to do stuff. And I was like, God, I can't believe I got to start all over. And then it's like the lesson was, no, what really happens is you kind of start, somehow you find your way with where you are. And in the original bands that I had been in St. Louis, there were some that were very popular, very respected, but we never could get a record deal, which was still 100% the goal at that time.
Sure.
The objective seemed like for everyone. And so when I got down here, this very sweet girl who was the cousin of the relationship, of the girl in the relationship I had just left. She was really entrenched in the music scene down here. And she called me and said, hey, there's this band. They just signed with Geffen Records. They're getting ready to put an album out, and they're looking for a drummer. And it was about a month in, or 2 months or something like that. So I was like, yeah, let me check that out. And so the first thing that came along was the thing that had eluded me the whole time in St. Louis. So I was very grateful for that. I will say this, the other cool thing that happened during that time too, when I moved down here, was like, I had to get a job. It's like I moved into an apartment, I had to get a job. Like, how do you pay the bills? Like, if it's not through music and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I had never been, I realized I had never, who was I if I was not a musician?
Sure.
If I didn't have that whole thing. And so I wound up getting this, I had like waiting tables at this Italian restaurant. I think I was helping another friend do some painting work and stuff. But I was working in this restaurant, and it was a fun, kind of partying crowd, like restaurant scenes can sometimes be. And so it was a good distraction in a way, but it was also this thing of like, I was very consciously like, I'm not the thing I've always been. And am I anything without that? Do I, you know what I mean?
Sure. Identity crisis for sure.
Yeah. It was, so it was healthy to go through that and figure out that I was okay. And that, so then when music started to reveal itself, and like I said, 2 months in isn't that long. So it was like, it was cool. It was like able to slip back, and then, and it, all those people, that whole crowd was so supportive. It was a band called Slowpoke that was out of Dallas, and kind of a pop punk thing, and we would play Trees all the time, those kind of places, and it was fun, but it was also really different. It was like, I was used to, even in original bands, doing 3 hour, 4 hour shows. Man, they would play 30 minutes, same set all the time, bam, 30 minutes. It was about 35 minutes long or something. It's like, wow, like, yeah, come in slamming, because there's no even time to warm up.
Right.
And then the other thing that came, there were corporate gigs. It's weird. Corporate gigs that I would always had, play, was kind of bread and butter. That came through a connection. A guy that I did those with in St. Louis had a gig down here, and he picked up a few guys here, and he knew I was here, so we did it. And then the bass player on that led his band, and that led to like 5 years with him. You know what I mean? It was like, it was a thing. And the other thing is, I remember right when I was leaving St. Louis, again, tribute bands weren't a thing. And I know it's like now that's almost primarily all I do. But at the time, they weren't a thing. But there were a few gigs I would play where whenever we would do Steely Dan tunes, this bass player would always go, man, wouldn't it be like fun as hell to just be in a band that only played Steely Dan music? and weirdly enough, I when I was here, and I was like kind of new and looking for opportunities, like I'd always heard, don't ever answer ads in the paper. You know what I mean? And it's so funny. You could read them and laugh at the kind of things that are in there. But one day I was flipping through the Observer, and it said in the back where it had some things and it said, trying to start a Steely Dan thing or something, and I thought, man, you know what? This could be a train wreck, but if nothing else, I'll just have an afternoon playing some Steely Dan tunes.
Right.
So I was like, I might as well give it a call, and that was the thing that formed into Naked Lunch, and I did that for 17 years, which Forgotten Space is about to pass that, but still to this day, that's the longest tenure of anything. So meaning like the one thing I thought, oh, you don't ever answer an ad, that never it turned out to be the thing, and not to keep going, but that led to, in those early days, Chuck Rainey, the bassist on all the Steely Dan stuff, turns out he lived in Bedford, Texas. He played with us. Then he asked me and some of the other people to be his backup band, and that led to some touring with him and recording with him and other Steely Dan alumni. And it was a really fun and sort of diverse first early few years here in Dallas.
Wow, that's like,
yeah, I know, it's like
mind blowing.
it really was. It was cool.
And so was that how you met some of these other bigger people, like photos with you and Phil Lesh, random stuff like that?
Oh, that came as a different thing, but it's funny when that you saw that picture I posted with Phil. Yeah, sure. So that was a thing That was in 2006, and it was a thing that Phil did called Phil-University, which would be like sort of a rock and roll fantasy camp thing. And he did it one time. Huh. And it was like, and I remember when he put, and at the time I had just been like, I got turned on to like going back into shows in 2001, and the quintet, like where it was Phil, Warren Haynes, John Molo, Rob Baracco, and Jimmy Herring, like that band. I mean, I just went full force and like was hitting tons of shows for a few years while that band existed, and that was the one that pulled me back. So I was really kind of into Phil, and by 2006 that band wasn't around, but I was still kind of following. So when I answered the call to this thing, and I remember I just thought, like, I saw it at first and blew it off, and then I was like you know, it was like announced on a Thursday or something, and like following Monday came around, and for some reason I got up and I walked into my like home office. I saw it, and I just fired off this letter real quick and said, here's who I am, this is what I do professionally, like here's who I've sort of I made some connections, and I didn't play Dead music like at that point, but I made some connection. Like I would sit in with Dark Star, and I, you know, I told him I play a lot of Steely Dan and Chuck Rainey and stuff. And and I sent it off and assumed there's no, you know, how many drummers are doing this or whatever. And then one night, you know, a week, 2 later or something, I came home from like a party gig, and I was married at the time. My wife was downstairs, and I walked in the office. Boom, you've been selected to come do this. I was like, huh, whoa. So then it was like, okay, so we went up it was in November of 2006, and it was, it was going to be a thing where there was like a band that played the first set, and then there was a band that played the second set, and it was a club called Soho in the Village that it's about 450 people. I could bring my wife. I got Dino in because they were starting a tour in Atlantic City the next night, and Rob Baracco, who's in the band, was playing a third sort of set. It was like Phil, John Schofield, Rob Baracco, and this New York drummer named Jazz Sawyer. So this was all part of the stay. And so like you go rehearse, and then you have dinner, and I couldn't even believe it. Like of all these musicians, like Phil sat right across from me at dinner. And I was like, I had a lump in my throat. Like meaning I actually almost froze up. I could not open up at dinner. I was so I was like in my head too much, you know. Sure. And but the gig not, and so the gig was great, and that picture was taken probably right before we played. And I love it, and you know, Jill, his wife, was there, and met a lot of people in the family, and Dino had thrown, in fact, Robbie Taylor, one of the Dead crew, he was the guy sort of helping with the kit and all the logistics of stuff, and Dino, who's friends with him, had given him a heads up, and so he was giving me a hard time in the best way. It's good stuff. But,
wow, that's cool. Yeah. That's cool. So wait, but get back to, so how does Forgotten Space come about?
So actually in the years, I said that was around 2006, like Forgotten Space, for me, my connection was somewhere in 04 or 05 or something like that. Like I started getting asked to come play. Actually, it was really, you know, it was Kendall that kind of brought me in, because he would always come out to Naked Lunch, the Steely Dan tribute band. He would always come to those shows at Club Dada, and there was a guy starting a thing named Phil, that like a Dead thing, and they were meeting at a place called Sugar Shack, which this other drummer owned, Lance Deal. And it was just kind of a collect, you know, I guess it was in a way kind of like the Dead thing, where it was like a collection of musicians and whoever was available, and they were, I don't know if they were trying to put it into a band, but we got down there, and it was like, wow, it was fun to play some Dead music, and it could be varying degrees of competency and all that stuff,
Sure.
but I had always been prior to moving to Dallas, I was a Nubos fan. And I mean, they were all on my radar in terms of musicians, and I was so into their record when I was at Mizzou. I mean, I played it for a year, and so Kenny was, and I knew other musicians that knew Kenny, not even in the Dead scene, like jazz musicians and stuff. And I always thought, wow, man, he'd be a great guy to know or jam with someday. And so one of those days at Sugar Shack, it turned out Kenny was going to be on. It was like, great. So then we met and played a few of those, and then that thing kind of fizzled out, and somehow and Scott Prosser, who was the original like Bobby Weir of Forgotten Space, he's the one who really started it and called it Forgotten Space and all that. Mm-hmm. And I remember he was tapping me to come play, and we rehearsed. I mean, I don't mean like real intense. I just mean we would get together and play and kind of try to work stuff out. But I couldn't. My calendar was like full. I mean, I used to play like 6 nights a week during this time, and It was like I was never available for a gig. So we rehearsed for a long time. We weren't booking gigs, and then they started booking gigs, and I had kind of pulled away because I just couldn't prioritize, and that was like when it was like, oh, everybody might make $30 or something, you know what I mean? So it was just like, okay, whatever. It's fun to do, but I can't, can't carve out a Saturday or something. And but it was cool. And I remember after going to play with Phil, that was the thing. That was one of the things where I was like, I came back and I said, oh man, this would be fun to play. So we started doing it a little more, and then it was like, that's when I kind of got more involved, and it was like trying to balance it with everything, but we started doing it where it was like kind of a regular lineup, like a set lineup, and we would play Club Dada, and then we moved it to Barley House, and it was like kind of a once a month thing. And it had like kind of a life, and then the thing that really kicked it into gear, at least for me, was there was a time where later on I was getting divorced, and I remember there was my brother who was running a company out of San Francisco. It was like, let's go out, hit some Dark Star shows. There's like a little run. Let's go hit those. And so I did, and the first one was like in Santa Cruz, and when they were doing an elective show that they're Rob buddies and So Kind, and they'd invite me up to join in on drums and stuff. And I remember I got up there and I was like, when I came back from that, I thought, man, like to step into the world was always really cool, because there was so much care towards detail. I mean, and it was like, and in a way, without it being cheap, they were living like if you mirror something so detailed, you are in fact you're living the experience like the group you're mirroring in a way or something. And everything, I mean, every detail was so thought out and organized and well done. That was my perception anyway. And it was like, and they're playing the rooms they're Grateful Dead. I mean, it was just like, man, they're living the life that the Grateful Dead. And it was pretty cool and exciting. I'd always had such a reverence for that, the way the Dead operated and everything. And like they were sort of a doorway into seeing that, like, wow, you know, and it made me realize that, like, oh, wow, we could. And then it's like, man, you know, like Kenny Withrow is a world-class musician, like, meaning it's not impossible for us to go do something beyond a once a month thing. That's like, let's just start. And so that kind of kicked it into gear for me. And I came back and I remember the first thing I was going to do was like, I'm going to build my own beast, like that drum setup. I'm going to build a beast. And I started doing that. And, you know, that was a very motivating thing. And, you know, it may seem inconsequential, but it's weird how steps like that changed. It was one of many that started to change the perception of what we did. And I mean, even from myself, I mean, like, you know what I mean? It was like, the more I got invested, the more I got into it, the more we could kind of get, you know.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, you had to create a kit where you could kind of emulate two drummers. So that's like another factor.
We were two drummers back then, actually.
Okay.
And that was fun. That was cool. And frankly, when we, you know, it's like, you know, when you're doing something, you'll say, okay, this is a hard position, but then, you know, you course correct as you go along. And I mean, the two drummer thing is awesome. I mean, there's sort of like, it's really, I mean, but like getting out on the road, at first I was like, we just won't play places that can't facilitate our whole scene, like our whole setup. And we're only, you know, if we get, and where we were as a band, the reality was there were sometimes we'd go into cities that the right room for us to play was definitely one that couldn't facilitate the whole thing. But it was like, and so sometimes we'd try playing another room, and it's like, you know, really playing that place is the place. And so you start to make certain compromises, I guess, or, you know, just because you're trying to, it's a balance of how you elevate everything. And so, and then it came down to when Pablo, you know, life called, and it was time to do something else, and it was like, for a while we were just doing it this way, and we had developed such a chemistry, like such a language, or, you know what I mean, intuition of how we interact, that it was like, oh, it wasn't always easy to just plug someone else in.
Sure. And
that whole chemistry also translates to just, you know, as you'll know, it's like, can you just hang and live and travel and be trapped in a box with these people? And like, you know,
yeah,
like it's sometimes weird to bring someone else into that inner circle. I mean, I shouldn't say it's weird. It's certainly not impossible, but where we were at the time, it was definitely a thing of like, wow, like it's one less consideration, was a bit of relief on one level, even though you were giving up the beauty, you know. I mean, I don't mean we didn't miss him personally, or
sure,
and we certainly missed the, you know, the musical thing too, but I just mean then it was like, but here's the upside part of it is like, you know, there's a little more room, and, right. And you know, it's easier to function, and so we just kind of started going in a direction like that. And I think I had always tried to play a little bit of, like, when I do it, I try to be both drummers to some degree. I'm not right. Sticking hard into one or the other these days. It's like, you know, it's like trying to play foundationally like Kreutzmann and then be the sort of soloing voice on top that Mickey is, and I hear the music that way, so it kind of comes out, you know. And then
yeah, no, it comes across, and it's amazing how much you can fill just by yourself.
Thanks.
So you have more than one tribute band though.
Yes. Yeah.
What else do you do?
So currently there's another one that's dedicated to the Who called Who's Best, and man, I just love that band. We don't get to play as often. Everyone in the band is really like a full-time musician, and but when we come together, it's just magical. Everybody loves the Who. Everybody
it's
completely
fun.
Like studied into it, and so really it really brings. I mean, it's for me it's hard music to. I mean, that was real. Like, even though I loved that and grew up with it, I mean, 2 hours playing Who music is like
it's a workout.
6 hours of playing Grateful Dead music, like,
right?
Yeah.
And that's two drummers, and it's still
yeah, right.
That's funny,
right?
Funny. And then you got Rosebud, which is Jerry Garcia.
Oh yeah,
which is
I
fantastic,
forgot that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, your guitar player, what's his name again?
Paul Metzger.
Gosh,
Yeah.
the fact that he was not a Deadhead, he just brings this really great vibe to the whole thing.
Man, thank you. I'm glad to hear you say that. I mean, I completely agree, but it's great to hear it.
Oh yeah, no,
Outside, because he's such a great improviser. I knew him through jazz world a bit, and he was actually really good friends with Scott Prosser, who I said him, and so that's why I thought maybe he might be into the Dead a little bit. I remember he came to a show of ours back in 2013, Fort Worth, and so I thought maybe he might. And it turned out it was not really that. He was awareness, like he's kind of would keep aware of things, so he wasn't completely foreign to him, but he'd never really delved in or played it. So yeah, he brings a great spirit to it. I feel,
not that there aren't other guys that do this well, but there's something about the fact that he wasn't like a Garcia disciple that just brings a freshness to the solos, like to that music. That's, I think, what the difference is for me. Again, I mean, I love Kenny playing Jerry's stuff. I mean, he loves Jerry, and so and that's obvious, and so that's a different thing in that. But like with Rosebud, it's I don't know. Anyway, you also have a Beatles thing, is that right?
I do. I'm part of a band that I called Me and My Monkey, and out of Fort Worth, and they've been doing it for like 25 years. They were a band together, and same four guys, and then and I joined that kind of during the lockdown pandemic, like so coming out, and then that kind of led to a thing where I'm playing a gig tonight actually with a band based out of California that plays Beatles music.
Oh, cool.
Called JP. So kind of just pick up gigs. It's really, it's like really such a joy anytime I get to play that music. It's, it always lights me up.
Right. I mean, also I saw you play that at the Rock and Roll Playhouse. Is that?
Oh yeah.
That's another thing you're doing.
Right. Oh gosh, I'm so excited about that too. It's Pete Shapiro, the promoter that put together like the Fare Thee Well concerts, and he owns Brooklyn Bowl and Relix. He started this program, and it's been in like 35 cities. I don't know why it took so long to come to Dallas, but it's like a different artist every month, and it's for kids, kind of ages, maybe 3 or 4 up to about probably 9 or whatever, and man, it's just awesome. And for me, it's just this great opportunity to either gather different sets of musicians that are friends or that I used to play with or play with currently or never played with, and put it together to sort of support an artist's music. So really fun to be able to do that.
It's fun, and the kids have a good time, although I don't recommend trying to limbo with them because they all cheat.
Did you go for the limbo?
I was taking photos. I wasn't participating, but I'm glad I didn't because I felt cheated. And they got the parachute going. It's really fun. Let me take this another direction real quick. So a lot of what you do, not all of what you do, but like, Forgotten Space is kind of like almost, some people would call it the cornerstone of like the Dallas jam scene right now. But how would you look at the Dallas jam scene, like, on its own and compared to other places?
My thought is, I wish I knew it even deeper than I do. As an old guy who just plays a lot, I kind of get in my own bubble at times. I can say from the viewpoint of, there are some really cool original things. I love Try More Mojo. I like Mason Adams. There's some cool stuff out there. From the perspective of forgotten, like playing Grateful Dead music, I got to say, it's amazing and shocking that Dallas is what it is and has been for so long. I mean, there are other guys, that can speak to those great days of the Dead thing more than I can. But I can say, even just from Forgotten Space Time and from playing Dead music in, California with some musicians and then taking Forgotten Space out, Dallas has a unique, supportive scene. One of the things that makes it different than other places is that it has, and the whole time I've been doing it, the people, it just keeps regenerating young and older people, younger people and older people, and it doesn't change. And in a lot of other scenes, it's one or the other, and then sometimes it just sort of like doesn't keep regenerating. And that's been the thing that blows me away about Dallas, because in most people that I talk to that kind of do stuff would almost agree that it's like, wow, that was the last place we expected to find it. But we have great venues too. I mean, look at Deep Ellum Art Co. and how that supports that. Look at look at the Granada Theater. I mean, it supports this kind of musical movement, and then you have so many people dedicated. Look at like Time to Fly, like look at the kind of stuff you're involved with, and it's just like, it's a great supportive scene. Yeah, absolutely. So you got anything cool coming up? Yeah, we're excited about our trip out to Ventura, California to play Skull and Roses Festival, which Phil Lesh is headlining, and many, I shouldn't say every, but many cool Dead bands. Dark Star Orchestra, Stu Allen, Mars Hotel, and so Forgotten Space, it's an honor for us to play that. That sounds fun. Is that at the Ventura Fairgrounds? Yeah, it's actually the actual spot where the Grateful Dead used to play, and they even go to the degree of, the stage has been moved since then, but for that festival, they move it back to the location that where it was when the Grateful Dead One of my favorite Jerry Garcia band shows was there. Oh, cool. God, it was so amazing. Yeah, I remember like just being on the beach beforehand and then just walking over to the show. Yes, so you're going to have a great time. It is amazing. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. Well, hey, thanks again for sitting down with me, Jerry. Thanks, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. Right on. Thank you. I'd like to thank Jerry Saracini for sitting in with me today. It was a great time. Theme song Unstoppable by Salim Narala. You can hear the Dallas Famous podcast every week, Sunday 1 p.m. on Deep Ellum Radio, then again on Tuesday at 1 p.m. And then a couple weeks later, we put them on all the podcast platforms. So check it out. Glad you're here. We'll see you next time.